But let's start off with the Browns quarterback situation.
The conspiracy of conspiracies, Will.
Kenny Pickett gets traded overnight to the Las Vegas Raiders, which means he's been traded from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia to Cleveland to Las Vegas over the last few years. Like, he's getting to a point where the value of the picks that he's taken are kind of slowly turning back into another first rounder. So,
and he's a Super Bowl winner. Like, that's my favorite thing about. Like, we were in New Orleans last year at the Superdome, covering the Eagles, cover the Chiefs. Kenny, you had Carson Wentz out there. Kenny Pickett wins a Super Bowl, and now he's just bouncing around all the NFL. And I guess somewhere out there, Terry Bradshaw is still convinced that the Steelers got it wrong with Kenny Pickett because they didn't surround him enough. If Kenny Pickett was good enough to be starting, he would be starting in the NFL. That's how it goes.
And on that very point, so Joe Flacco is the nominative starter in Cleveland. They have the two rookies sat there, Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders. Gabriel was kind of named the backup during, or in that way of when we see training camp and we see snap counts and we see everything else, it appeared like he was going to be the key backup. When we've seen his work in preseason, not been great. Joe Flacco, we've seen very, very little of. Shedeur Sanders, we've seen a lot of. 3 quarters in a game here, 2 quarters in a game there. And it's beginning to start to get some momentum, both amongst the Browns fan base and wider, that Shedeur Sanders, if he's going to get that many snaps, surely he needs to be taking practice reps with the ones, and surely he should be higher up this quarterback depth chart.
But should he? I mean, I don't think he should be right now. And I love it. We're at the point in our general discussion, our NFL discussion, the way that we talk as human beings on social media, that everything has to be a conspiracy anymore. It's absolutely absurd. Number one, let's roll the stats. Dylan Gabriel had significantly better stats than Shedeur Sanders during the preseason. Number two, most importantly, everything comes down to, Will, initially where you are drafted. Now, your favorite quarterback of all time, according to you, the greatest quarterback of all time, Brock Purdy, is the ultimate Mount Rushmore proof that it doesn't matter where you're drafted. And I fully agree with that overall long term. But Brock Purdy didn't come in and in training camp, he all of a sudden became the backup and he was the anointed one. That happened through injuries. If Shedeur Sanders becomes the starter eventually for Cleveland, because of two things, Will, because he's really good, and because it ended up working out in his favor. They drafted Dylan Gabriel higher. They drafted him 3 rounds before. Of course, Dylan Gabriel is going to get more of an edge. And this whole idea that comes out from, bleeping people on social media, influencers, people who are just trying to brand themselves and say as much as possible that Shedeur Sanders should be working out with the ones all the time. When did that become that's never been a thing in the NFL. I covered training camp after training camp. The top QB works out with the ones, the backup works out with the 2s, and your 5th rounder probably works out with the 3s. Shedeur Sanders, this is the main thing, hasn't faced anything any different than anybody else has who's a 5th round pick. He is a 5th round pick, Will. So if he is good enough, he will be a starter. If the Browns didn't want him, they wouldn't have drafted him. If the NFL didn't really want him, he wouldn't have been drafted. He would have been blackballed. I saw what Eric Dickerson said. Show me some proof, man. Eric Dickerson, by the way, not the bastion of authenticity in terms of a Corvette comes to mind, right, at SMU. So this whole idea that Shedeur Sanders is being held back by the NFL and held back by the Cleveland Browns, if I look at the numbers, one stat stands out. 7 sacks. 7 sacks in the preseason. Some of that's on his line, and some of that's you're playing with 3s. A lot of that is on a 5th round pick who's trying to do too much and running all over the field. It doesn't cut it in the NFL.
But people love to make excuses. People love to say it's because he's playing with the 3s. It's because he's played more snaps. It's because of the line. But the fact is you're also playing against the 2s and 3s when you're playing with the 3s. You're not facing.
I dealt with this every year in the
preseason
with the Houston Texans, right? So if the fans had their favorite quarterback at the time and they were in quarterback hell, so it was really hard. And I get it. But if they had their chosen backup, it was Tom Savage at one point, they would always flip the conversation to fit them. He's only playing with the 2s and 3s. Well, he's going against the 2s and 3s. That's how it goes in the NFL. They protected Joe Flacco during the preseason. Dylan Gabriel threw the most attempts. Shedeur Sanders had 1 good game against a bunch of 2s and 3s, and his last preseason game was absolutely horrible. No wonder he's number 3 on the depth chart, Will.
I think there's a twofold conversation here, right? The Shedeur Sanders of it all is that Shedeur Sanders isn't a 5th round quarterback. Shedeur Sanders, for every talent evaluator, every scout out there who's spoken out on this, everybody had him as a first rounder in a weak quarterback
Yep.
draft. And maybe if he'd come out last year with a very strong quarterback draft, he would have been a second rounder. There's no way he slips to the fifth unless there's all the nonsense and noise around him. There's the Deion Sanders of it. There's the apparently that he went into interviews being very cocky, basically being like, what can you do for me rather than what can I do for you?
Like, you have to sell me on your team for me to go there, which is what you do in high school and college when you're on a recruiting tour.
Like, there is the whole that element of it, and there is the cult of personality that comes with it, and there's the fact that that's going to draw way more eyeballs.
And a lot of baggage, Will. A lot of baggage.
It's really fascinating that, and I'm sorry to do this, but you brought up the Brock Purdy situation, and what that says to me is it's about a kind of organizational structure and the Browns is a complete mess. Because the story we hear from Jed York, the owner of the 49ers, is that he turns up for the first day of training camp and he has a meeting with Kyle Shanahan where, with Jimmy Garoppolo sat there as a guy who's taken them to a Super Bowl, with Trey Lance, a guy they spent 3 first-round picks on, he sits there and says to Jed York, I think the third-string quarterback might be our best quarterback. On day 1 of training camp, the coach recognised it, the GM recognised it, and yes, he came in because of injury, but within the organisation, if Brock Purdy hadn't started during that playoff run, he'd have been starting week 1 the next season. I believe that. From a Browns perspective, we have no idea if the owner is the one that actually was drafted.
Jimmy Haslam will tell you he didn't want to draft him.
Who was behind the Dylan Gabriel pick, which made no sense where he was picked. He's an undersized guy who, maybe has performed a bit better than Shedeur, but doesn't have the traits to be a long-term starter in the NFL, I believe. And it is just the constant clown show that the Cleveland Browns have been for years and years and years now.
Deshaun Watson come back at any point with this $230 million contract. The biggest irony for Shedeur Sanders for me, and I have nothing against like the Shedeur supporters, the fanboys, the fangirls, whatever. Fine, like that's who you want to base your life around. That's fine. People are into K-pop and people are like whatever, man. Like whatever you're into,
K-pop
that's
Demon
cool.
Hunters is a banger.
But he went to the worst organization for him, and the fact that he fell to the 5th round and went to an organization that already had Deshaun Watson, that went all into Deshaun Watson when nobody else wanted to do that, and everyone else in the world would have told you, stay 100 feet away from him, like on the sidewalk. If Deshaun Watson's on the sidewalk, you go to the other sidewalk. They draft Dylan Gabriel early. You still have Joe Flacco. Most teams in the NFL wouldn't have Joe Flacco as their starter. In Cleveland, he is the anointed starter. I talked to Tony Grossi, longtime Browns reporter for talkSPORT, exclusive interview. In Cleveland, because Joe Flacco had 4 good games, they treat him like he is the god of Cleveland football. So you have all these problems, all this drama, all the back history. That is the worst team and the worst fan base he can go to. And they want a savior, but he's going to have to prove it, Will. And he did not prove it in the preseason. His last preseason game was freaking horrible. He's lucky he didn't get cut.
I'm not gonna go preseason game horrible. I'm going to make a judgment there. Cam Newton was terrible in the preseason, and went on to have a great season.
Preseason doesn't really matter, but it's all we have to go off of.
From my perspective, my belief with this team is that you've given Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry all the rope in the world, while at the same time holding on to those reins. It's like you're going to keep letting them run, but you're just going to keep them within arm's distance of you at the same time. Yep. And if this organization, if this was a new head coach and a new GM coming in, and this was the setup they have, here's what I believe they do. They go, right, Shedeur Sanders has got the highest ceiling and the highest upside of any of the guys on our roster. Run him out there, play him, see what he does. If he's horrible, we draft a quarterback in a much better quarterback draft next year. Yep. If he's good, then we've actually discovered something. Dylan Gabriel's not that guy. And guess what? 47-year-old Joe Flacco isn't that guy either. And it just all keeps coming down to the Browns being a complete and utter mess. As much as Shedeur and his whole cult of personality brings it upon himself, this wouldn't be happening somewhere other than the Cleveland Browns.
I agree with you, and ultimately, I do, as much as I could say, hey, Shedeur, you should have played better in the preseason, your last game was horrible, you're a 5th-round pick, on and on. It is not his fault. Like, he didn't choose to go to the Browns. He was drafted by the Browns. That's a problem that the NFL has, and they're never going to fix that. You would have to have a strike for years. What likely happens? Joe Flacco is okay. Joe Flacco gets hurt. Joe Flacco gets benched at some point. They want to see what Shedeur Sanders can do. I've gotten this from multiple people. You want to see what Dylan Gabriel can do. So this year, it's very likely that Joe Flacco, Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders, nobody knows what they're going to do with Deshaun Watson, and they could still win, 3 or 4 games and draft a quarterback in the Arch Manning draft next year in the top 5. How likely is it that Shedeur Sanders becomes the franchise quarterback for the Cleveland Browns and lasts there for 10 years?
It's a lot less likely than if they actually let him have an opportunity, but I don't think it's a conspiracy. I just think
But
it's
if they wanted to let him have an opportunity, you don't draft Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round. That's been the problem from day one, man.
My hot prediction is that Shedeur Sanders is starting by week 5 here in London against the Minnesota Vikings.
Circled in red pen on my personal calendar for months.
I'm watching Shedeur Sanders preseason because come week 5, I think I'm going to be calling play-by-play on Shedeur Sanders starting a game. So I'm watching.
And he is electric. I mean,
close.
Like, sure, he has it. He's Deion Sanders' son, for crying out loud. That is a definition of swagger. But in the NFL, I did this for 2 decades. It is the most cutthroat business, and in the end, it only comes down to one thing, Will. It comes down to talent. If he is good enough, they will see that. It's not going to matter about preseason. Preseason is absolutely meaningless. It will matter during workouts during the week and during practice, and it will become so obvious that the locker room buys into him, the coaches buy into him. Even if the owner doesn't, they'll have no choice but to put Shedeur Sanders on the field, and the only way that happens is if he is good enough.
Let's talk about a team who I think are buying into a rookie quarterback. And no, not Cam Ward, who none of us have talked about, despite being the number 1 overall pick, and actually looking pretty good in preseason. Like, he's starting to get a little bit tasty with some of the takes on him.